The waitress pointed at him the second he sat down. "Sir, that seat's taken." He glanced around. The whole place was empty. Then she added, louder this time, "We don't serve people like you here. Now get up before I call the sheriff." The forks stopped clinking. The old men at the counter kept staring, grinning like they'd seen this movie before. He didn't move. He just said, "Ma'am, I'm just here for lunch." And that's when the phone call went out. "Yeah, we got a black man causing a scene." The Georgia sun had that slow burn that made the highway shimmer like it was breathing. Jerome Carter squinted behind the wheel, hand resting on the window frame, arm catching the light like bronze under glass. His old pickup hummed steady, radio murmuring low blues through dusty speakers. 45 years old, Army veteran, 12 years of service behind him. But he still sat upright like he was on patrol. He wasn't heading anywhere special, just passing through after visiting his mama's grave in Augusta. The drive back toward Alabama was long, and the silence between small towns felt heavy in the heat. But somewhere around noon, a roadside sign caught his eye. Big red letters peeling at the edges. "Home of the best pie in Georgia, Rosie's Diner." He smiled faintly. He'd heard that line 100 times in his travels, every little town claiming it had the best of something. But the hand-painted pie on the sign looked convincing enough. And truth be told, he could use a break. The diner sat just off Highway 27, surrounded by rusted pickup trucks, a Coca-Cola machine that looked older than him, and a flag waving lazy in the sun. A bell hung above the door, then the glass had that slight warp that made the world bend when you looked through it. Jerome parked, shut off the engine, and for a moment just sat there, letting the quiet settle. His mama used to say every Southern diner carried a soul, that you could tell by the smell if you were welcome. He smiled at the memory, took a breath, and stepped out. Inside, the air was thick with bacon grease, coffee, and old stories. The jukebox in the corner crooned something from the 70s, slow and sweet. Boots tapped, forks clinked. Sunlight spilled across red leather booths and checkered floors that had seen, for a second, Jerome felt like he'd stepped into a postcard. He took off his cap, always respectful, and nodded toward the counter. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said softly to the waitress behind it. She was middle-aged, hair up in a messy bun, pencil stuck behind her ear. She gave a polite half-smile and nodded back, but her eyes slipped right past him like he was a shadow moving through sunlight. Didn't matter. He'd seen worse. He found a booth near the window, the kind where the vinyl seat sighed under your weight and slid in. The table was clean, napkin holder shining, sugar packets stacked just right. Somebody had cared once. He looked out the window for a while. Kids on bikes, an old man sweeping dust off the curb, a stray dog sniffing around a trash can. The kind of scene you could paint and call it home. He smiled to himself. Yeah, maybe this place really did have the best pie in Georgia. A minute passed. Then another. No one brought a menu. ... Didn't bother him yet. The waitress was chatting with some folks at the counter, laughing, flipping her notepad closed with one hand. Jerome folded his arms on the table, patient. He was good at waiting. The Army taught him that. He glanced up at the chalkboard. Today's special: chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes, sweet tea. Sounded like heaven. He thought about how his mama would have loved a place like this. The music, the smell of biscuits, the way everything felt stuck in time. She'd always say, "Sometimes you gotta stop moving, baby, so the world can catch up." He missed her more than he wanted to admit. He pulled out his wallet and glanced at the old photo tucked inside. Him in uniform, arm around her, both smiling like the world hadn't learned to hurt yet. "Miss you, Ma," he whispered. "I'm doing all right." The bell over the door jingled again. A group of men walked in, farmers by the look, muddy boots, faded caps, sunburnt faces. They laughed loud, easy, like they owned the air. One of them looked Jerome's way, eyes narrowing just a little too long before looking back at his friends. Jerome felt it, that shift, that subtle tightening of the room. It wasn't words. It was the way conversation dipped for half a beat too long, the way the jukebox seemed a touch louder now. He'd been in enough small-town diners to know that silence like that didn't come from shyness. Still, he smiled. Always lead with respect. Always stay calm. That's how his mama raised him. Don't let other folks pull you into their darkness. He cleared his throat gently, catching the waitress's eye. "Ma'am, could I get a cup of coffee when you get a chance?" She froze for half a second. Then her smile came back, thinner this time. "We'll be right with you." He nodded. "Appreciate it. ... Then she turned away and stayed away. Minutes passed. His reflection in the chrome napkin holder looked patient, but his chest felt tight. The laughter from the counter grew louder. He heard snippets, not words, but tones, that low chuckle people use when they think you're out of earshot, but not out of mind. He sipped from his water glass, now warm. The jukebox changed songs, Elvis this time. He almost laughed at the irony. Still no menu, no coffee, just that slow, creeping feeling that the warmth in the room wasn't meant for him. He looked around once more. The flag by the door, the family eating pancakes, the little girl coloring in a kid's menu. It was all so normal, so perfectly, painfully American. He exhaled, steady and slow. All right, he thought. Maybe they're just busy. He'd seen this dance before. The polite kind of racism, the kind that wore a smile and carried a towel. He rubbed his thumb along his dog tag chain, the metal warm from his skin. The name engraved there reminded him who he was, Jerome L. Carter, United States Army. He'd survived worse than ignorance, but still, it stung. Not because he expected more, but because he'd hoped this town might be different. He leaned back, eyes on the best pie in Georgia sign painted across the far wall, and whispered under his breath, "Guess we'll see about that." Outside, the sky shimmered brighter, that southern glare that hides heat under beauty. Inside, something colder began to rise, and Jerome Carter, soft-spoken soldier that he was, could already feel the calm starting to burn. The bell over the door jingled again, and the sound felt sharper this time, like a warning instead of a welcome. Jerome sat still in his booth, back straight, eyes calm. He rubbed his thumb along his dog tag chain, the metal warm from his skin. The name engraved there reminded him who he was. Jerome L. Carter, United States Army. He'd survived worse than ignorance, but still, it stung. Not because he expected more, but because he'd hoped this town might be different. He leaned back, eyes on the best pie in Georgia sign painted across the far wall, and whispered under his breath, "Guess we'll see about that." Outside, the sky shimmered brighter. That southern glare that hides heat under beauty. Inside, something colder began to rise, and Jerome Carter, soft-spoken soldier that he was, could already feel the calm starting to burn. The bell over the door jingled again, and the sound felt sharper this time, like a warning instead of a welcome. Jerome sat still in his booth, back straight, eyes calm. He'd learned long ago that sometimes peace wasn't the absence of noise. It was the discipline to hold your breath while the room decided what to do with you. The chatter that had once filled the diner dimmed by degrees until it wasn't conversation anymore, just low murmurs and forks scraping on porcelain. The jukebox crooned an old Patsy Cline tune, and even her voice sounded uneasy, like the vinyl itself knew something wasn't right. Jerome shifted slightly in his seat, his boots creaking against the tile. He noticed the waitress at the counter, same woman from before, hair pinned up, apron smudged with flour. She was laughing with one of the men at the bar, but the moment her eyes drifted toward him, her smile faltered. She turned back fast, whispering something he couldn't hear. He didn't need to. He'd been reading Lips of Prejudice long before cell phones could record it. He checked his watch. 12:12 p.m. Lunch rush, supposedly. But the table stayed half empty, the space around him wider than it should have been. Folks walked in, saw him sitting there, and subtly adjusted, choosing seats on the other side, pretending to scan the menu while throwing glances like stones. Jerome's stomach rumbled. He rubbed his palms together, trying to stay patient. "Ain't that something?" he muttered under his breath. "Man fights for a country that can't even fight its own reflection." He raised a hand, polite and measured. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called to the waitress. "Could I just get a coffee to start?" "Black's fine." No answer. She busied herself at the register, fiddling with napkin holders that didn't need fixing. The cook, a big man in a stained white shirt, peeked through the kitchen window. Jerome caught his eye for a half second, just long enough to see it. That look. Not fear, not hate exactly, just discomfort. The kind that says, "You being here makes me have to think about things I don't want to think about." The waitress finally turned, voice flat as a countertop. "We're closing soon." Jerome blinked, glancing toward the clock over the jukebox. 12:15 p.m. He looked back at her, polite but firm. "Ma'am, your hours say open till 3. She shrugged. "Kitchen's winding down." "Then maybe I'll just take that coffee and a slice of that famous pie y'all brag about." Something twitched in her face, some mix of guilt and irritation. She leaned toward the man sitting at the counter. He muttered something. They both laughed under their breath. Then she said louder, "I'll check what's left." The laughter nearby faded to murmurs again. Jerome felt it, the way the room's air thickened, like syrup heating too long on a stove. Every sound became heavy, spoons clinking, boots shifting, whispers floating through. Even the ceiling fan above him seemed to slow down, lazy and watchful. He folded his hands together on the table. Calm, always calm. In Afghanistan, he'd learned to control his breathing when things got tense. Back then, the danger had come with uniforms and sandstorms. Here, it came with polite smiles and menus that refused to appear. A couple 2 booths over kept staring. Older folks, mid-60s, Sunday clothes on a weekday. The woman's lips pinched tight. The man whispered something behind his hand. They didn't look away when Jerome met their eyes. They just studied him, like he was something misplaced in the scenery. He gave them a nod. Afternoon. They didn't respond. Minutes dragged. The waitress still hadn't brought the coffee. A bead of sweat rolled down the back of Jerome's neck. The air conditioning buzzed overhead, but the heat he felt wasn't from the weather. A young man in a ball cap walked in, looked around, and said, "You guys still open?" The waitress brightened instantly. "Sure are, sweetheart. Sit anywhere you like." Jerome watched her grab a menu, brand new, laminated, and hand it over with a smile that had been missing 5 minutes earlier. He almost chuckled. It was almost funny how predictable it all was. When the young man glanced over and saw Jerome sitting alone, his smile dimmed too. He looked like he wanted to ask something but thought better of it. He turned back to his table, shoulders stiff, pretending to study the menu. Jerome leaned back, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above him. His patience thinned at the edges, but he kept his posture perfect. He wasn't about to give anyone what they were waiting for. That's what this was about, after all. Not food, not service. It was a test. How much dignity could a man hold while being slowly erased in public? The waitress finally reappeared, notepad in hand, smile painted on like old wallpaper. "You still need something, sir?" Jerome kept his voice even. "Just the coffee. I asked a while back." Her eyes darted to the counter where the men sat. One of them, gray beard, thick arms, grinned and said, "Thought you folks liked sweet tea." The table near the door chuckled. Jerome turned his head toward them, slow, steady. He didn't glare. He just looked. And for a moment, the laughter died like someone turned off the radio. He looked back at her. "Coffee's fine." "Sure," she said quickly, tapping her notepad though she hadn't written a word. "We're running low, though." He smiled lightly. "Ain't that something? Best pie in Georgia, but no coffee." She didn't answer. She turned away, muttering, "We'll see what we got." By now, the other customers weren't even pretending not to watch. Every movement Jerome made drew eyes. Reaching for his wallet, silence. Adjusting his sleeve, chairs creaked. He could feel the unease ripple through them, like they were waiting for him to snap. He wouldn't give them that. He'd fought beside men who hated him and still saved them when the bullets came. He'd survived things none of these folks could spell. He wasn't going to lose his peace over their fear. He sat quietly, hands folded, waiting for a cup that wasn't coming. Out by the counter, the waitress leaned toward the manager. Tall man, bald head, arms crossed. She whispered, but the tone carried. "He's still sitting there." The manager looked over, jaw tight. "Then tell him we're closed." "But just tell him." Jerome caught every word. He looked out the window again. Sunlight blinding bright now, the highway shimmering in the distance. For a fleeting second, he thought about just leaving, saving his peace, letting the town stay small. But another voice, deeper and older, rose inside him. "No, son, you fought for this flag. Don't you walk away from your own country." He exhaled. "All right, Ma," he murmured under his breath. "Not this time." The manager wiped his hands on his apron and started walking over, his shadow cutting across the checkerboard floor. The boots at the counter shifted. The laughter stopped. Jerome Carter sat perfectly still, his face calm, his heart steady. He wasn't looking for a fight, but this time, if the storm was coming, he wasn't moving. The floor creaked as the manager crossed the diner. He wasn't rushing, just walking with that kind of confidence that small-town men wear like a badge. Broad chest, slow steps, heavy hands. The chatter died before he even reached the booth. The waitress ducked behind the counter, pretending to stack mugs that didn't need stacking. Jerome Carter didn't move. He just looked up, calm as the eye of a storm. The man stopped at his table, arms folded. "Sir, I hear you're having some kind of problem?" Jerome tilted his head slightly. "No problem, sir. Just been waiting on some coffee." The manager's tone came smooth at first, rehearsed. "Yeah, we're short-staffed today. Kitchen's about to close." Jerome gestured toward the young guy eating 2 booths away. "He just got served. Didn't look closed to me." That sentence landed like a brick dropped in still water. Small splash, long ripple. Every head turned again. The old couple by the window went stiff. Someone's fork clinked against the plate and stayed there. The manager forced a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. Well, sometimes we make exceptions for locals. You're not from around here, are you? No, sir, Jerome said evenly. Just passing through. Saw your sign. Figured I'd stop in, support small business, grab a bite before hitting the road. Well, that's mighty kind of you, the manager said, his smile tightening. But we got folks here who don't feel comfortable right now. Jerome blinked slowly. Don't feel comfortable? That's right. He leaned forward slightly. Then maybe they should leave. A sharp silence sliced through the room. The men at the counter stopped mid-laugh. The waitress froze, hand hovering over the coffee pot. Even the jukebox seemed to hesitate. The last note of a country tune hanging in the air, like it didn't want to fall. The manager's jaw twitched. Sir, I'm trying to keep this a friendly place. Don't make it harder than it has to be. Jerome nodded once. I know what you're trying to keep, and I'm sitting here peacefully. Ain't raising my voice, ain't causing no scene. Just waiting for service like everybody else. You've made your point, the man said, eyes narrowing. Now I'm asking you to go. Jerome's gaze stayed steady, unflinching. You're asking the wrong person. For a moment, the only sound was the fan above, its slow, lazy spin marking the seconds between dignity and disrespect. The waitress shifted uneasily, then walked to the phone on the wall. Her fingers trembled, but she dialed anyway. Sheriff's office, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Yeah, we got a disturbance down here at Rosie's. Some guy's refusing to leave. Jerome turned his head slightly. His voice came low, controlled. Disturbance, huh? That what I am now? She didn't answer. She hung up fast, wiping her hands on her apron like she could wash the guilt off. He looked back at the manager. You really calling the law over a man waiting for lunch? The man's voice hardened. You made my customers uncomfortable, son. That's enough reason. Jerome's tone stayed even, but his eyes flashed like flint striking steel. Name's not son. It's Sergeant Carter, U.S. Army. Served 12 years for a country that's still trying to figure out how to serve me back. That name hit different. The ruse shifted again. Just a little. But no one said anything. One of the farmers at the counter muttered, always playing the soldier card, under his breath. Jerome heard it. He just exhaled slow, steady, like he was counting breaths before a firefight. He'd learned in combat that silence could be armor. A pickup rumbled outside. The bell over the door jingled, and 2 customers slipped out quietly, not wanting to be witnesses. The light through the blinds carved stripes across Jerome's face, the same pattern as a cell. He sat straighter. You know, he said quietly, every time I think maybe we're past this, somebody like you reminds me how far we got left to go. The manager's face reddened. You're making this bigger than it is. Jerome tilted his head. Oh, I know exactly how big it is. I seen men die fighting for less freedom than the right to sit in a booth. He stood up slowly. Not aggressive, just tall, steady. His shadow stretched across the checkerboard floor, long and unbroken. The waitress stepped back. The men at the counter went quiet. The room, once warm with comfort, now felt cold enough to bite. Jerome looked at the manager one last time. You could have just brought the coffee. The man didn't respond. He just crossed his arms tighter, like pride could protect him from shame. Outside, a siren wailed faintly in the distance. One short burst that cut the air like a blade. Jerome knew that sound. Not the siren itself, but what came after. The shuffle of authority. The script of assumption. He sighed, muttering, Here we go. He sat back down, calm as ever. If they were going to drag him out, they'd have to do it in front of every pair of watching eyes. He wasn't leaving quietly. Not this time. A few minutes later, tires crunched gravel. Through the window, the reflection of red and blue lights flashed against the glass pie display. The bell above the door jingled again. But this time, it didn't sound like a welcome. It sounded like judgment arriving in uniform. The sheriff stepped inside. Gray hair, mirrored sunglasses, star glinting under the fluorescent light. He carried himself like every inch of the county belonged to him. Behind him, 2 deputies stood stiff, hands near their belts. The sheriff looked around, then fixed his gaze on Jerome. "You causing problems, boy?" The word hit the room like a slap. Jerome didn't move. "Just hungry, sir." The sheriff smirked. "Then go find somewhere that wants to feed you." A low chuckle rolled through the counter seats. The waitress folded her arms, relief washing over her face like she'd just been rescued from guilt. Jerome leaned forward on the table, elbows resting on the surface. His voice was soft, but it carried. "You got a sign outside that says, 'Home of the best pie in Georgia.' Don't say nothing about who's allowed to eat it." The sheriff's smirk vanished. "You got 2 choices, son. You walk out or you ride out." Jerome stared at him for a long, still second. Then he said quietly, "I'll walk when I finish my coffee." "You don't have any coffee," the sheriff shot back. Jerome smiled faintly. "Exactly." That broke the room's composure. A couple of the men laughed, nervous, unsure whose side they were on anymore. The sheriff's face darkened. He took a step closer, voice low. "You think this is funny?" Jerome looked up, steady as stone. "No, sir. Just think it's sad." For a moment, they just stared at each other. 2 men who both wore uniforms once. One who fought for freedom, the other who enforced boundaries. Then the sheriff tapped his badge. "You got 5 seconds." Jerome didn't move. "Make 'em count." The waitress whispered, "Sheriff, maybe we should—" "Stay out of it," he snapped. The tension crackled now, thick enough to choke on. Even the clock on the wall seemed to tick louder. Jerome finally stood again, slow, deliberate. "Fine," he said softly. "You want me gone? I'll go." He took his wallet from his pocket, placed a $10 bill on the table. "For the coffee you never brought." Then he turned toward the door, calm, unbroken, moving like a man who'd been through hell before and recognized the heat. As he stepped outside, the sun hit his face hard and bright. The deputies followed him out, their boots crunching gravel like punctuation. The sheriff lingered, glaring through the window. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. And somewhere in that stillness, shame began to settle. But near the back corner booth, a man who hadn't said a word all afternoon, young, white, trucker cap low over his brow, set down his fork, pulled out his phone, and hit record. He'd seen enough, because silence was how this town stayed the same, and he wasn't about to be part of it anymore. Outside, the Georgia noon had turned thick enough to taste. Sunlight bounced off chrome bumpers, off the sheriff's cruiser parked crooked across 2 spaces, off the sweat gathering on Jerome Carter's neck. He stood beside his pickup, posture straight, dog tags glinting faintly at his collar. Calm, but coiled. Inside the diner windows, faces pressed against the glass. A dozen curious eyes, framed by red and white curtains. Nobody stepped out. It was easier to watch than to witness. The sheriff pushed open the door, letting the AC sigh behind him before it slammed shut. His mirrored shades hid everything but attitude. He walked slow, heavy boots grinding gravel, one hand hooked on his belt, like a gunslinger from an old movie that never learned it was outdated. "All right, boy," he said, voice lazy with power. You mind telling me why folks can't eat their lunch in peace? Jerome turned, steady. I didn't bother nobody, Sheriff. Just wanted coffee. The sheriff chewed that answer like gristle. Funny, 'cause what I heard was you were refusing to leave, starting trouble. Jerome nodded toward the diner. Guess trouble looks different depending on who's looking. A smirk flicked across the old man's face. You got a smart mouth. Just a memory, Jerome replied. Tends to remember what I fought for. The sheriff's smile faded. You trying to make a point, soldier? Already did, Jerome said quietly. Still waiting. On a cup of coffee to back it up. The deputies shifted behind the sheriff. Two younger men, same mirrored glasses, same posture. One tapped his baton against his thigh, Novus rhythm echoing against the metal of the cruiser. Jerome could see his own reflection in their lenses. Just one black man standing in the open sun, surrounded by authority that mistook color for threat. He'd seen that reflection before, on different ground, holding a rifle instead of his wallet. The sheriff stepped closer. The smell of sweat and aftershave filled the few inches between them. Look, he said, lowering his voice like a teacher tired of repeating himself. We don't need any scenes out here. You just climb in that truck and move along. Nobody gets embarrassed. Jerome's jaw tightened. Already too late for that. The sheriff's hand brushed the badge on his chest. You testing me? Jerome shook his head. Just hungry. Behind the glass, the waitress whispered to the manager. He's still not leaving. The manager didn't answer. The reality of what they'd started was starting to feel real. Inside the booth by the window, Eli, the trucker, kept his phone low, recording through the gap in the curtains. The camera caught the shimmer of heat, the curve of authority leaning in on calm. The sheriff sighed like a man forced to perform. You army boys always think you can bark orders everywhere you go. Jerome kept his tone level. Army boys learn to stand where it's right, even when it's hot. You trying to be a hero? No, sir, Jerome said. Just trying to eat. That answer, so simple, so quiet, landed heavier than any shout could have. For a second, even the deputies seemed unsure what to do. Then the sheriff turned to them, waving a dismissive hand. He's trespassing. If he don't move, haul him in. Jerome looked at the badge again, then at the town stretched behind them. Hardware store, feed shop, church steeple stabbing the sky. Same picture he'd seen painted on postcards, promising southern charm. He let out a long breath. Sheriff, you arresting a man for sitting down ain't keeping peace. It's proven a point you ain't brave enough to say out loud. The sheriff froze halfway through adjusting his hat. The deputies exchanged glances. Jerome took one slow step forward. I gave this country 12 years of my life. I don't scare easy. So if you're gonna arrest me, do it honest. Don't hide behind disturbance. Say what it really is. The old man's throat moved once, dry. For a flicker of a second, something human, maybe shame, crossed his face. Then he swallowed it down. Get in your truck, Sergeant. Jerome stared at him, silent. Then he nodded, small and deliberate. You're right, I'm leaving. He walked around the front of the pickup, every step echoing against the gravel. The deputies backed away instinctively. He opened the driver's door, paused, then turned back. You ever wonder, he said, voice soft but cutting, why men like me still come home and believe in this place? The sheriff didn't answer. Jerome gave a faint smile. Mainly 'cause we keep hoping one day it'll believe in us, too. He climbed in, shut the door, and started the engine. The sound filled the parking lot, rough and steady. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then he eased out onto the road, dust rising behind the tires like smoke from something finally burned out. Inside, the silence was thick. The sheriff lingered by the door, muttering, "Ain't right when outsiders stir up good folk." But the waitress couldn't look at him. She stared down at her hands, whispering, "He didn't do nothing." Eli pocketed his phone. He'd filmed every second. He took one last look through the window at the dust cloud drifting down Highway 27. Then he said, almost to himself, "World needs to see what good folk look like when they're quiet." That night, in a cheap motel 2 towns over, Jerome lay on the bed, boots still on, TV humming low. The evening news showed nothing about Rosie's Diner. Just weather, traffic, sports. Business as usual. He reached for his dog tags, thumb tracing the metal edges. The silence of the room pressed in. He whispered, "Guess some fights don't end overseas." Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far off, soft, low, promising. The calm had broken. The storm was on its way. Eli Turner wasn't the kind of man who liked getting involved in other folks' business. He drove long hauls across the South, hauling freight, eating diner food, and minding his own. But that afternoon at Rosie's Diner, something inside him cracked. He'd come in for lunch, nothing special, just a burger, fries, and maybe a refill of coffee before heading toward Montgomery. But when he saw the way the room froze around that black veteran, the way laughter dimmed into whispers, and the waitress kept forgetting to serve him, it hit a nerve he didn't even know he still had. He'd grown up in towns like this. He knew that look, the one folks used when they wanted to make a man disappear without ever raising their voice. His daddy used to call it Southern courtesy with a mean streak. Eli had told himself he was different. He worked hard, treated people fair, didn't use the words his uncles used after a few beers, but sitting there, watching that soldier hold his dignity like a shield while everyone else pretended it was normal, he realized that not speaking up was just another way of joining in. He'd started recording when the manager approached. At first, it was just instinct, a gut reaction to injustice he didn't quite understand yet. He held the phone low, camera angled toward the booth, his heart hammering harder with every word. Then the sheriff showed up, and he knew this wasn't just another story whispered over coffee. When Jerome stood, voice calm, posture unbroken, Eli felt something shift. It wasn't anger. It was shame. Not the kind that makes you hang your head, but the kind that burns through your chest until you have to do something about it. He'd never seen someone stay that steady while being disrespected so loud and so quiet at the same time. By the time Jerome drove off, leaving dust and silence behind, Eli's hands were still trembling. He looked around the D. The waitress stared at the floor. The sheriff lingered by the door, muttering about outsiders. Nobody said a word. Eli pocketed his phone, dropped a few bills on the table, and walked out. The parking lot smelled like rain and gasoline. He climbed into his truck, shut the door, and just sat there for a while, both hands gripping the wheel. The footage replayed in his mind. The sheriff calling him boy. The deputies closing in. That steady voice, saying, "Maybe one day this country will believe in us too." He'd heard patriotism his whole life, but never like that. He unlocked his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. He watched the clip once, then twice. Clear sound, steady image, the kind of video you couldn't argue with. He whispered to himself, "You ain't supposed to let stuff like this slide anymore, right?" He hesitated a long time, thinking about the town, his job, the people he'd known all his life. Folks around here didn't like people stirring up trouble. But trouble had already walked through that diner door wearing dog tags. Eli opened his social media app, something he rarely used except for checking weather updates. He hit post. The caption read simple, just like the truth. This man just wanted lunch. They called the cops instead. He hit upload. He didn't expect anything to happen. He figured maybe a few friends would see it, maybe some local chatter. Then his phone started buzzing. Once, twice, then constantly. By the time he reached the next town, the post had already blown past 10,000 views. Comments poured in faster than he could read. Unbelievable. Typical small-town racism. That man's a veteran. Where's the respect? Then the counter-arguments came, like they always did. We don't know the whole story. People play the race card too much. He probably got aggressive. But the video didn't lie. Jerome's calm, steady voice, his restraint, the sheriff's smirk, it was all there. America had seen itself in the reflection, and the mirror wasn't flattering. By midnight, the clip was viral. Every major news outlet had reposted it. Hashtags started trending. Hashtag pie and prejudice. Hashtag veteran denied service. Stand with Jerome. Eli couldn't believe it. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, bloggers, strangers thanking him for recording. Even his mother called from Tennessee, voice shaking. "Baby, that you who posted that video? I saw it on the news." He didn't know how to feel. Proud, scared, both. He wasn't looking for fame. He just wanted folks to see what he saw. Meanwhile, Jerome was parked at a small motel off the interstate, asleep, with the TV still on. He didn't know he'd become the center of a storm overnight. The morning news woke him before dawn, a familiar voice echoing from the screen. Viral outrage tonight after a Black Army veteran was denied service at a Georgia diner. Video posted by truck driver Eli Turner shows the man being confronted by staff and law enforcement. Jerome sat up, heart sinking. His face filled the TV, grainy but unmistakable. He ran a hand over his beard, muttering, "Lord have mercy, not again." His phone buzzed nonstop. Unknown numbers, news stations, messages from old army buddies. "Saw the video, brother. Standing with you. You handled that with grace, man. Proud of you." And then one that hit hardest. "They did this to me in '98. Ain't nothing changed." Back in town, Rosie's Diner was under siege. Reporters parked outside. Locals shouting at cameras, defending or denouncing. The sheriff's office released a statement. The situation was handled according to protocol. No bias was involved. That word, protocol, ignited more fury. Online, people flooded the diner's Yelp page with one-star reviews and long, angry paragraphs. Veterans groups across the country shared the clip, demanding accountability. Someone even started a GoFundMe page for Jerome's legal fees, though he hadn't been charged with anything but existing in the wrong place too long. Eli watched it all unfold from his truck, parked at a rest stop. He scrolled through the comments, face lit by his phone screen. He saw people fighting in the threads, strangers turning his post into a battleground. For a moment, he felt overwhelmed. Then he saw one comment that steadied him. "Whoever filmed this, thank you. You gave a voice to someone who's been silenced too many times." He exhaled slowly. "Guess that's all that matters," he said to no one in particular. The next morning, he got a call from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer until he saw the area code. "Hello? Eli Turner? Yeah, who's this?" A pause. Then a deep, calm voice he recognized from the diner. "This is Jerome Carter." Eli's heart jumped. "Oh man, hey, I didn't mean to make your life blow up like this." Jerome chuckled softly. "Life's been blown up before, son. Least this time, it's telling the truth. Eli exhaled, relieved. I just thought people needed to see, that's all. You did right, Jerome said. Ain't your fault folks can't handle what they see. They talked for a few minutes, two men who'd met in silence, now connected by noise they couldn't control. Before hanging up, Jerome said, Next time I'm driving through her way, I owe you a coffee. Eli smiled. Make it pie, too. I hear Georgia's supposed to have the best. They both laughed. Quiet, tired, but real. That day, across America, people watched the clip again and again, some in anger, some in denial. But for the first time, the story wasn't buried under excuses or politeness. It was out there, raw, unfiltered, undeniable. And somewhere between the diner and the highway, the truth finally had a witness. By the time the sun came up again, Jerome Carter's name was everywhere. Morning news anchors smiled tight smiles as they traded lines about racial tension in Georgia. Clips from Eli's video looped on every network. The sheriff calling him boy, the smirk, the steady voice saying, Just hungry, sir. They played it between weather reports and sports updates, like it was just another story to fill the air. For Jerome, it wasn't just air. It was oxygen turned to smoke. His motel phone rang nonstop. Unknown numbers, media outlets. He ignored them all, sitting on the edge of the bed in silence, the TV flashing his own face back at him from across the room. They showed his military photo, the clean-cut uniform shot from 15 years ago, as if the stripes made his pain more legitimate. They called him the veteran denied service. Nobody called him a man. His breakfast sat cold on the table. He wasn't hungry anymore. Outside, a group of reporters had already gathered in the motel parking lot. Microphones, cameras, boom mics sticking up like metal weeds. He closed the blinds, muttering, Damn circus. He didn't want fame. He wanted coffee. That was all he ever wanted. But in America, a black man's pain always came with an audience, especially if he didn't shout. Across the country, the arguments started. On TV, was this really about race or just a misunderstanding? Shouldn't we hear both sides? There's no proof the sheriff acted with bias. Online, hashtag #StandWithJerome trended on Twitter, followed immediately by hashtag #SupportOurSheriff. Comment sections filled with fire, some burning in outrage, others in denial. People wrote essays, politicians tweeted prayers, activists called for protests, and through it all, Jerome Carter stayed silent. Meanwhile, Rosie's diner turned into ground zero. Reporters swarmed the parking lot. Protesters lined the street, holding signs that read "Justice for Jerome" and "Serve everyone." The sheriff's department tried to block the road, but the crowd only grew. Inside, the manager refused interviews. The waitress stayed home, blinds drawn, her phone flooded with hate messages and guilt she couldn't wash off. Someone spray-painted on the diner's brick wall, "Home of the best pie, unless you're black." In the middle of it all, Jerome sat in that small motel room with his mother's photograph in his hand. He stared at her soft smile, the one that always said, "Keep your head high, baby." He whispered, "I did, Ma. I did." The door knocked gently. It was Eli. He'd driven back down from Tennessee. "Mind if I come in?" Jerome nodded. "You already made me famous. Might as well step in." Eli gave an awkward half-smile. "Didn't mean for it to blow up this bad." "Bad or good," Jerome said. "Depends who's talking." They sat across from each other, one man guilty for speaking, the other exhausted from being seen. Eli rubbed his hands together. "They want me on some talk show tomorrow." "You too." Jerome shook his head. "Nah, I ain't nobody's headline. I ain't got no speech ready. Then maybe you don't need one, Eli said quietly. Maybe you just tell the truth. Jerome thought about it long after Eli left. He turned off the lights and sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the highway outside. The truth was, he didn't feel brave. He felt tired. Like every generation before him had carried this same weight. And here he was, picking it up again, one cup of coffee at a time. On social media, veterans began posting their support. Pictures in uniform. Hashtags, he served too. One clip went viral. A group of black and white soldiers saluting in front of their base, holding a sign that read, "Man fought for this country and can't even get a sandwich." ... Cable networks turned that photo into headlines, unity and outrage. But underneath the surface, the division deepened. Local radio callers defended the sheriff. Old-timers said, that man just wanted attention. The town's mayor tried to calm it all down. We're a peaceful community, he said. This doesn't represent who we are. But Jerome knew better. It represented exactly who they were, just finally caught on camera. His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't media. It was his daughter, Maya, 21, college student, smarter than her years. "Daddy, I saw the video," she said, her voice trembling through the line. "Why didn't you call me?" He hesitated. "Didn't want you worrying." Too late for that. People online saying awful stuff about you, some calling you a liar. He sighed. "Let 'em talk, baby. Truth don't need defending." "But it hurts," she said softly. "Seeing them treat you like you don't matter?" Jerome closed his eyes. "It's always hurt, swear. I just stopped showing it," she sniffled. "You shouldn't have to." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, but here we are." That night, a national news anchor introduced the story like it was a movie trailer. A small Georgia diner, a quiet man, a country divided once again. They played the clip one more time. Jerome's face, calm, proud, tired, filled screens in homes across America. The sheriff's sneer beside it. And that one sentence that cut through everything. "I fought for this flag. Didn't know I had to fight for a seat under it too." Except Jerome hadn't said that. Not yet. That would come later. For now, it was just the truth, waiting for a microphone. As the night deepened, the motel lights flickered. Jerome stepped outside, phone buzzing in his pocket, reporters still circling, like moths on the highway shoulder. He looked up at the stars, same ones he used to stare at overseas when he couldn't sleep. Same sky, different battlefield. He whispered to himself, "This ain't about a diner. It's about what folks still see when they look at me." The wind carried the hum of distant thunder again. He could feel another storm coming, not in the sky this time, but in the hearts of people who'd finally seen something they couldn't unsee. A week after the video went viral, the same Georgia sun burned down on a crowd that had outgrown Rosie's parking lot. Cameras, banners, police tape, TV vans, the little diner that once fit 30 people now held the eyes of the nation. The mayor had called a press event. Folks in town called it damage control. To Jerome, it just felt like another long day that wouldn't let him rest. He arrived in a dark suit, no tie, shoes polished, his posture straight as parade rest. He didn't come for spectacle. He came because silence never fixed anything. Eli met him near the curb, nervously tugging his hat. "You sure you want to do this, mister?" "Carter? These people..." And ... Jerome cut him off gently. "They need to hear it from the man they tried to erase." Reporters swarmed when he stepped forward. Shutters clicked like insects. The mayor, a sharp man with a forced grin, raised a hand for quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Today, our town acknowledges a grave mistake. What happened here at Rosie's Diner does not represent our values. Jerome heard the script before the man even finished. Our values? This isn't who we are. He'd heard those phrases his whole life. After every headline, after every sin caught on tape. Then the mayor gestured toward the diner door. Out walked the waitress and the manager. Their faces were pale, eyes darting anywhere but at Jerome. The sheriff followed last, stiff-backed, jaw clenched. No sunglasses this time. Just bare eyes under an old hat. Cameras zoomed in. The mayor cleared his throat. They have something to say. The waitress stepped to the mic first. Her voice cracked. I was wrong. I let fear and ignorance guide me. I can't take that back, but I'm sorry. The crowd murmured. Some nodded, some scowled. Then the sheriff took the stand. His tone was flat, but his hands shook slightly on the paper he held. I reacted poorly. I saw a situation and assumed the worst. I forgot the uniform don't make me right. He paused, glancing at Jerome. For that, Sergeant Carter, I apologize. Jerome studied him quietly. He could tell it wasn't easy. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but it was something. The mayor turned to him. Mr. Carter, would you like to respond? Jerome stepped up to the microphone. For a moment, he didn't speak. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The flash of cameras painted his face in bursts of white. When he finally spoke, his voice carried like gravel and gospel mixed together. I didn't come here looking for revenge, he said. Didn't come here for politics either. I came here because my mama raised me to finish what I start. He looked at the sheriff, then at the diner behind him. I fought for this flag overseas, watched brothers of every color bleed for it. We didn't ask what each other looked like when the bullets started flying. We just fought to make it home. But back home, he paused, shaking his head. Back home, I still gotta fight for a seat under that same flag. The crowd went still. A few reporters lowered their cameras. I didn't ask for a parade. I just asked for pie. But what I got instead was a reminder that some folks still measure worth by skin before character. And I'm tired. We all are. He turned slightly toward the crowd. Locals, protesters, strangers. This ain't about me anymore. It's about who we decide to be when nobody's recording, when there's no hashtag, when it's just us and the truth. Eli stood near the edge of the crowd, eyes wet, camera hanging at his side. He wasn't filming this time. He was just listening. Jerome continued, softer now. I forgive, but I don't forget. Forgetting means it could happen again. Forgiven means I'm not letting it live rent-free in my soul. He smiled faintly. And Lord knows, I got better things to do than hold hate. Applause rippled, hesitant at first, then strong, rolling through the crowd like wind through wheat. Even the sheriff bowed his head. For once, the old man didn't reach for excuses. Afterward, the mayor announced the diner would close for 30 days for retraining and review. A local veterans group would lead diversity workshops. Half the crowd called it progress. The other half called it performative. Jerome didn't care either way. He just wanted peace. A journalist from Atlanta tried to shove a microphone in his face. Mr. Carter, how does it feel to make history? He smiled faintly. Ma'am, history's been trying to make me for 400 years. I'm just trying to live. She lowered the mic, speechless. When the crowd finally thinned, Jerome walked toward the diner door. The waitress stood there, twisting her apron. He stopped beside her. You ever think about why it was so easy to look through me? She swallowed hard. every day since. Good, he said softly. Keep thinking. That's how change starts. He opened the door, stepped inside. The place was empty now. Chairs up, sunlight slanting through blinds, dust motes spinning in the air. He looked at the booth where he'd sat that day. Same table, same seat. But the silence felt lighter somehow. He whispered to himself, "Guess the storm finally cooled off." Outside, the crowd cheered one last time. Eli caught up with him. "Think they'll really change?" he asked. Jerome smiled. "Don't know, but today they listened. That's a start." That night, footage of the speech played across every channel. Clips of his words looped over soft piano music. Headlines screaming, "Veterans' grace moves a nation." Jerome Carter's message of forgiveness sparks hope. Some called him a hero, others called him naive. But for once, the country stopped arguing long enough to listen. As the camera lights faded and the reporters packed up, Rosie's Diner stood alone again. Quiet, small, human. A piece of America, cracked but not broken. And somewhere down the highway, Jerome drove with the windows down, wind whipping through the cab, the small smile tugging at his mouth. He didn't feel like a victim. He didn't feel like a symbol. He just felt free. The road home was long and straight, split by endless pines and telephone wires humming with the wind. Jerome Carter drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the old dog tags that hung at his chest. The radio played faint gospel, low, distant, peaceful. After days of noise, this silence felt sacred. He stopped at a rest area miles outside town, the kind with cracked picnic tables and vending machines that never worked. The sky above stretched wide, washed clean after the storm. He sat on the hood of his truck, watching clouds drift, breathing like a man who'd finally put something down he'd carried too long. He thought about how it all began. A diner, a cup of coffee, a polite sir. So small, yet it had pulled a whole country into conversation. Funny thing, how change never starts with parades. It starts with somebody refusing to move when the world tells them to shrink. Jerome smiled to himself. "Guess you were right again, Ma," he whispered. "Can't run from what needs facin'." He could almost hear her voice answering back. "Hold your head up, baby. Storms don't last forever." The reflection wasn't about the sheriff or the waitress or the town's apology. It was about what they all revealed. The quiet machinery of prejudice. The one that still runs even when folks claim it's gone. It hides behind smiles, behind policy, behind "we're closing soon." It doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs people to look away. Jerome looked down at his hands, big and rough, palms lined from decades of work and war. These same hands built homes, carried rifles, held flags, he murmured. Then softer. "Still gotta prove they deserve a seat at a table." He exhaled, letting the weight slide off his shoulders with the wind. On his phone, notifications kept lighting up. Messages from strangers, soldiers, pastors, teachers. One caught his eye. "My granddad never spoke about the racism he faced. You said what he couldn't." Another. "I showed your video." Fresh paint, new staff, and in the window a small framed photo. Jerome shaking the mayor's hand. Under it, a plaque that read, "For the man who reminded us what service really means." Tourists stopped to take pictures now. Locals muttered that things had changed too much. But inside, every new hire learned the story on their first day. The waitress who replaced the old one said quietly, "Respect ain't policy, it's practice." Weeks later, Jerome visited his mother's grave again. He laid fresh flowers, the same kind she liked, sun-colored daisies. "Made some noise again, Ma," he said, smiling. "Didn't plan on it, but I reckon somebody had to." He stood there a long while, wind brushing through the trees, whispering like distant applause. When he finally turned to go, peace followed him down the hill. That night, he sat on his porch back home, the sky painted orange by the setting sun. The news had moved on. New stories, new outrage. But the diner incident still echoed quietly in people's minds, like a lesson half learned. He didn't need headlines anymore. The real victory was the small one. The next time a man like him walked into a place like that, maybe the room wouldn't fall silent. He leaned back, eyes half closed, and spoke into the fading light. Racism don't always wear a hood. Sometimes it wears a name tag and a smile. Sometimes it says "Sir" while telling you to leave. But the truth, real truth, ain't scared of sunlight. You shine it long enough, even the ugliest things start to fade. He let the words settle in the air. The world didn't need another hero. It just needed people willing to stay human.